Again, thank you all for coming out to Cocktails and Fishtales this evening. It's great to see you. And we have, I feel like, one of my favorite new Harbor Wild Watch monitoring opportunities to highlight this evening. If you haven't heard of the European green crab, Elyse is going to tell you all about it. So I will say not too much about that, but we're going to learn about that tonight. And we're definitely excited because this is something Harbor Wild Watch has been actively participating in, which is this early detection of this invasive crab species. And it sounds like Elyse is in charge of being like, oh, here's the reports coming in, let me approve them. And so our little crab molt treasure hunts get to Elyse. So this is your person behind the scenes making our data magic happen. Elyse just finished finals this week, so round of applause for that. She's a graduate student at the UW, and I'm gonna let her, oh man, I almost had it memorized, but she's studying environmental science and things, and she's working with Washington Sea Grant as part of the crab team, doing trainings, inspiring people to care about this topic, and I'll let her take it away from here.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Elyse Kelsey and I'm a graduate student at the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs at the University of Washington Seattle campus. So that means I work with communities, the social science side of things, and also the natural side of science, particularly with coastal hazards, climate change, and public health. But when I'm not at school, I work at Washington Sea Grant as a crab team student assistant. And today I'm going to talk about Crab Team and you, how citizen science supports invasive species management. A little bit about Crab Team. So Washington Sea Grant is an organization that's housed within the University of Washington Seattle campus. And Sea Grant programs are national at every coastal state and Great Lakes states housed in research universities. And Crab Team is a program within that, and Sea Grant's whole mission is surrounding the extension of marine and community issues, getting people to care about marine issues, engaging with the communities on the water. And Crab Team does both education and the science side of things. On one particular invasive species, which is, as you guessed it, the European green crab. This crab is incredibly damaging to the environments that it invades, and it's known as one of the top most damaging invasive species across the world. Today we're going to talk in the presentation a little bit about the basics and background of both just the crab itself, how it got here, its invasion history, and some of its biology. A little bit about Washington Sea Grant's Crab Team, which is a long-term ecological monitoring program that Crab Team has run for the last 10 years. We just celebrated 10 years, very exciting. And also about the current status of management in Washington State. After this kind of background piece, we're going to talk about Molt Search, which is the volunteer citizen science program that's rolled out all across the Elyse coastlines, and how anyone can get involved in looking out for these crabs when they visit a beach near them. And then third, I got to teach you what to look for when you're out on the beaches. That's a really key part of knowing what to look for when you're keeping your eyes out for invasive European green crab. Alrighty, let's jump into the first section. So we care about these crabs mainly because of the abundances that they reach. When they reach really high abundances like we see on the screen, their impacts are massive. And we see in these photos, these are not from Washington State's coastlines. These are from the east coast of the United States, particularly in the northeast, where they've been around for hundreds of years. They can reach really high numbers, and when they reach these massive numbers, they effectively kind of start to wipe out a lot of the native biodiversity that's in the area. Just because they're competing with and predating on a lot of these species. So when we see these crabs move into an area, we see on the left a very healthy ecosystem prior to green crab invasion. And so we see recreational fishermen, we see terrestrial wildlife using the habitat, a really nice stable bank. We see eelgrass and kelp forests that are important nursery habitat for salmonids and forage fish. And then on the bottom there, we see native crabs and shellfish. All of these are important for coastal communities, also just for the biodiversity of the area. And on the right, we see the anticipated impacts on if European green crabs become established on beaches. We see impacts to recreational fishing and terrestrial wildlife that use the area. We see destabilization of the shore bank due to the green crab's foraging and burrowing activities. We also see that eelgrass kind of getting wiped out, less forage fish, and basically all that's left in the bottom of the screen is European green crab. And again, these are the anticipated impacts if European green crabs become abundant in Washington state. And we know this just by seeing, again, those areas where these crabs have been around for a long time, like on the East Coast, we're starting to see and monitor those impacts. So there's 4 things that make these crabs so successful in colonizing the habitats when they arrive. The first is that these crabs are incredibly prolific. They reach reproductive age size much earlier here in Washington state, and we can have multiple clutches of eggs a year, which can be as many as 250,000 eggs that they can release. So they're incredibly prolific. And so that means even from a small founding population of just a couple of individuals, populations can become pretty established relatively quickly. The next is that these crabs are generalists. They will eat about just anything they can get their claws on. The world is their oyster and their buffet, and they do eat oysters. So here are some of their favorite foods, including oysters, clams, cockles, snails, and mussels, a lot of the same things we like to eat, in addition to a lot of native crabs that are their same size or smaller. Additionally, they can survive and thrive on a completely vegetarian diet, meaning they can eat, reproduce, and be completely happy just eating eelgrass. So if they kind of start wiping out some of their favorite foods, they can pivot and eat something they might not like to eat as much. The next thing about these crabs are tolerant to a really wide range of different conditions, including temperature and salinity. So their temperature tolerance allows them to live in really warm waters like in California or colder waters like Southeast Alaska. And then as well, their salinity tolerance, they aren't just marine crabs. They can kind of hide out in estuaries where there's freshwater input. So they have a range of habitats where if they don't really like the salt water so much, they can move into freshwater, where a lot of our native crabs are pretty restricted to that saltwater environment. And this estuary habitat allows them to get convenient rides across the globe because this is where a lot of our ports are. And so these crabs, when they're in their larval form, can get scooped up and transported all over the globe. And so that's how they become a global invader. The fourth and final thing is that these crabs are really small. When they're at their largest size, they are only 4 inches across the back of the carapace, making them much smaller than Dungeness crabs. And when they're transported place to place, they're in their small microscopic larvae form, like Zobia and Megalopa, and so they can kind of get carried around on the tides. It's not something you can see just by peering down at the water. As I mentioned before, they can get scooped up in ship ballast water and transported. They can be included in the seaweed packaging of live bait and live seafood that then gets discarded at the next harbor. And they can also just wash around in the tides because they're just so teeny tiny. So this really is a global spread. So their home native range is not surprisingly in Europe as the European green crab. So that is their native range in blue. And they've hitched a ride on boats and all the vectors I mentioned before. So the red lines are their primary invasion from their native range to a new habitat. Then the dashed line is a secondary invasion, meaning they didn't come from their source native range, they came from another invaded area. And that's the way that they came to the west coast of the United States, is from the east coast. So the west coast history is pretty unique. It goes back to 1989 when they arrived in California Bay, again through ballast water, through the live seafood packaging of seaweed. And then they were established there for a few years, and then the larvae were carried north due to warm climatic events and warm tides that brought them up the coast into Oregon, and then in the late 1990s to the Willapa Bay region of the Washington Pacific coast. From there, they moved further north to Vancouver Island in 2010, mainland Canada in 2020, and as far north as Southeast Alaska in 2022. So the current status on the coast is that the waters are constantly awash with the larvae that are washing up from Oregon and California, and so the management strategy there is to really maintain an understanding of the trends on the coast, understand where populations are growing, where new populations are showing up, and then also take an assessment of things like shellfish beds and other areas of particular important economic activity that are important to the communities there in order to try to trap locally and get those populations down or even locally eradicated. So here in inland Washington, it's a little bit of a different story. We have this outwash and outpouring of fresh water that kind of keeps these coastal waters and tides that are full of larvae at bay. So it's kind of pushing all this water out and just making it really hard for larvae to come into the Salish Sea. And so because of that, we're at a little bit of a different stage from those first detections in the 1990s on the Pacific coast that really didn't get established until the 2020s. Here in the Salish Sea, the first detection was actually in 2012 on Vancouver Island in Sook Basin. And when this first detection occurred, managers at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, which was the managing agency, they were kind of worried that we were going to start seeing European green crabs inland. And so answering a call from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Sea GrantCrab Team, which was a group of crab biologists and specialists in invasive species, to start mapping locations around the Salish Sea where they thought European green crabs could become established and be successful in early populations. So they mapped out all of these locations in the Salish Sea, gave them a lot of coding levels. I'm not quite sure what the red, orange, and yellow means. I think it's just where they think the crabs are going to be first, second, and third. And then they created a crab team, which, if you don't know what that is, it is an ecological monitoring system. And so we have sites all along the Puget Sound, Salish Sea, and on the Pacific coast that are staffed, if you will, by community volunteers and partner staff from agencies and tribes. And so these teams, we train them on European green crab detection, how to identify native critters, and they go out and trap looking for these crabs. And so they go out there April to September, 6 months out of the year with their team to a local estuary near them that was mapped with being suitable habitat for an early detection of European green crab. And this program has been going on since 2015. We had a couple sites in 2015, and the programs continue to grow. And so each time that they go out and trap, there's 2 different protocols. The first is a trapping protocol, and so they set out 6 traps, 3 minnows, which are these ones up front, and 3 fakui traps, and they're baited with mackerel bait. So we have a huge bait cutting party every February to cut 1,000 pounds of mackerel into little Ziploc bags, so we can portion it out to all of the volunteers at all the sites. And so they set these traps for an overnight low tide. Leave the site, they're all staked down in the ground, leave them overnight, and the next morning they come back, look at all the native critters that are in their catch, taking measurements of crabs, identifying every species that comes into their trap, and then releasing everything right away, unless it's a European green crab, which has happened. Spoiler alert. And then in addition to these trapping, we take all of this data into our database, and we also have our molt hunt, which is looking around on the shorelines, looking for the discarded shells of crabs that they shed when they grow, and they discard their exoskeletons, to try to see which crabs might not have ended up in the traps, but are still in the environment, using the area, and we have evidence that they are in the area from their discarded shells. So, once volunteers are trained up on those 2 protocols, they go out and looking at some of their sites. We rolled this out in 2015, so just a handful of sites. And one such site was Westcott Bay on Salmon Island. And as they were looking through their traps one day, looking through native fish and sculpins and shore crabs, lo and behold was the first European green crab that was detected on the Washington side Salish Sea. And so that was a pretty good sized green crab. That's a picture of their bin photos, because we have all of our volunteers take photos of every single bin, just so we verify, the scientists on our side kind of verify what they're seeing and answer any questions. And that was definitely a good sized green crab. And since that first detection, the populations in the Salish Sea have continued to increase. Populations, especially in the North Sound, have continued to increase. But the thing to remember is that in the Salish Sea, green crab detections are still relatively rare, but populations are growing in numbers year over year, because this was in 2016. So we're a little over 10 years since then. So since then, this last year in 2014, Washington Sea Grant has grown to 68 sites from that just few handful the first year in 2015, 57 in the Salish Sea and 11 on the Pacific coast. We also have 307 trained monitors that have contributed hours that are both community volunteers and partner staff from agencies and tribes. And so volunteers have been going out every year. We just had one volunteer that's been with us since the very beginning. He has not missed 1 month. He just retired from crab team duty, and so it's just hundreds of hours of being out in the mud and looking for green crabs, and we have a lot of kind of like OG crab team members that are just really great to see and connect with, and that's part of my job, is both entering the data and also participating in trainings, answering any questions, and just really getting to know a lot of our volunteers, which has been really fun. So for the South Sound region in particular, I figured I'd kind of zoom in on this area. So here's a map that I created for some of our trapping presentations we do. So this is a map of all of the Salish sea sites that are the dots. White dots are locations where no European green crabs were trapped. And then orange was where a handful, like 2 to 3, and then the orange is 4 to 5 European green crab. That's molts and trout. So in the South Sound region, we started out in Butterball Cove in Olympia in 2015. That was one of our first South Sound sites. Then we expanded to 2 Vashon Island sites in Anderson Island, which are also down that way. And then 2017, we started the Titla Lagoon site, which is closest to Gig Harbor, and that's in Tacoma. So here's a picture of me and the other crab team student assistant Zach, and our community science specialist Lisa, putting out temperature loggers into the water because we track temperature at a handful of sites throughout the year. And then we also have some volunteer pictures of folks doing trapping in 2021. So that's a plug for a really close crab team site that we have volunteers at. Management-wise, we are not the only organization that's doing crab team work. We were one of the first, but we have many co-managers, tribes, and partners that are working on this issue. And the consistent crab team monitoring that we do that's establishing this baseline data is really beneficial to kind of bolster up some of the opportunistic trapping efforts that these partners are doing. So once a detection has been made, trapping partners go out and set up hundreds of traps in the area to try to remove traps. That's like opportunistic trapping and removal trapping. So partners that conduct green crab trapping in the South Sound are the Department of Natural Resources, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Nisqually Indian Tribe, and the Squaxin Island Tribe. They all do trapping down this way. So the big picture overall, so here's a map from 2023. The thing to remember for particularly with Salish Sea is that European green crabs remain rare along inland waters. Populations are growing and spreading statewide to new locations, and we're trying to still slow an early stage of the invasion. So we're still on a different stage of the invasion than we are on the Pacific coast. And a lot of the funding has come from Governor Inslee's declaration of a crab emergency in 2022. So I'm going to break down this figure a little bit here, this map. This is from 2023. This is like the last complete year we have. A lot of the 2024 trapping is still kind of rolling in, as there was some winter trapping done this year. So every single dot represents a trapping location, not just by crab team or WDFW, but anyone that's putting traps in the water, including shellfish growers. And blue dots show that there was no crabs trapped at those sites. Red dots showed at least 1 crab was trapped, and this was for the year 2023. So it kind of shows the extent on the Pacific coast. Almost every single dot is red because there's populations pretty well established up and down. But in the Salish Sea, a lot of the populations are pretty much up in the North Sound and then in the Hood Canal area, but nothing in the South Sound. Yeah, let me know. All right, so for the WDFW Green Crab Hub, that is the management portal that has all up-to-date information. I pulled this image. It's not very exciting because there were no crabs found, but it's just a really great tool to look at different management areas. And so I pulled the South Central and then South Puget Sound. And so this was for every year since that emergency declaration was made. They have a really, really great tracking tool. So if you want more information, their website is fantastic. That was my plug for the Green Crab Hub. So for detection, the best method is live crabs through trapping, like Crab Team and other partners do. And then the detection method is through the molts, which is what both of the crab team data collection methods are based on. So once a detection has been made, the goal is early detection really soon after those crabs show up in an area, and then passing that off to WDFW to do rapid response, placing hundreds of traps in the water in order to fish down that population as quickly as possible. The thing with trapping is that it's pretty labor intensive. It requires a lot of tools, the bait, which is no fun to handle and keep in your freezer, and then also it requires a permit just to be trapping live animals. And so the detection methods for molts is really accessible, and that is what Washington Sea GrantCrab Team program is based off of, which is our citizen science program to get community members that already spend time out on the shorelines looking for these crabs and getting more eyes out on the beach for early detection. Alrighty, so that was the kind of background, history, and current management status. I'll pause here for any questions before we jump into the Molt search program overview. Yes?
So what do you hear from the Europeans about what they're finding and what success they may or may not be having?
Well, I personally don't hear anything. But so for their native range, they're not a problem. They're just kind of the regular shore crab that they find. And their numbers don't get that high in that region because they have parasites that keep their populations in check. So they're not kind of wiping out everything, and all of the other crabs and fish have evolved with these crabs. And so they don't reach the same numbers because they have the parasites that help. All of the crabs that showed up through the waves of invasion have not had the parasites that keep populations in check. And researchers don't want to introduce those parasites because it could have negative impacts on our native crabs as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there definitions for invasive versus native species in terms of especially native species extending their range, maybe associated with climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know in the scientific community there's not a consensus on native or invasive and non-native, and especially with climate change playing a huge role in changing temperatures of water, especially for marine species. I think it kind of comes down to not personal preference, but I think kind of like different literature has different definitions, and so I think for me personally, I use invasive versus non-native depending on the amount of damage that a species does.
Okay.
But I think other scientists that study invasive species will definitely have a better answer than I do. Yeah.
What is, for these crabs, what is kind of like the primary kind of damage that they're doing? I mean, I know you said that that they are damaging and they're invasive, but what is primarily that they're doing that, we're trying to eliminate them?
Yeah, I think based on kind of the populations that we're seeing on the East Coast, they're just kind of wiping out a lot of the biodiversity in the area and just out-competing and predating on crabs. Additional to like the biodiversity and impacts, they're kind of turning shorelines into just huge mud flats, just really destabilized banks that don't foster all of biodiversity because it's all just kind of one type of habitat for a lot of species. Oh yeah, I'll go from back to front.
You showed in your first chart that you thought the terrestrial animals would disappear. I would think that there's food for them. I mean, the abundance of this, and they love to eat crab. I mean,
yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of instances of like raccoons and otters getting in and predating on crabs, and especially they like our bait too when we're out trapping. But some species really want kind of like smaller crabs, especially I'm thinking of birds, things like that, versus these big crabs. They're pretty feisty. They can take down a crab if their size are equal. So if these European green crabs are predating on smaller crabs, it kind of removes that prey source for a lot of species. But there have been a lot of instances of otters especially eating them, and I know there's some research being done looking at terrestrial impacts and seeing how the predation can help keep these populations in check.
how do these green crabs eat an oyster, or how do they get an oyster or a clam or something like that?
They have really, really strong claws, so they can kind of crack them open and then.
An oyster?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Particularly when they're really, I think, really young, not when they're like huge.
What do you mean, oysters are really small?
Yeah.
Not huge, but like adult size, I suppose. Yes.
For your data gathering, can you collaborate with the fishing industry or the oyster grabbers?
Yeah, definitely.
To be on the lookout for them? And the second question is, what happens when you find an invasion if you found that the Hillwell site in Tacoma, what would happen?
For your first question, we do partner with a lot of shellfish growers, just because, especially on the Pacific coast, we're seeing a lot of green crabs hanging out around their shellfish beds. And so one of our partners that actually has a crab team site is Brady's Oysters in Westport. And so when they do crab team monitoring every month, and then also while they're out doing their work, they're also pulling green crabs out, sometimes even hand capturing crabs. So we do work with shellfish growers like Taylor's too. As when they find crabs, they freeze them and mail them to us. Not us for genetic research, but we have a partner that does genetic research. We do the coordination. So as people that have permits, that's an important piece. Like Taylor Shellfish, a couple other shellfish growers, they're able to hang on to those crabs and freeze them and then mail them for genetic research so we can kind of track the populations. And the second question is, if you find the crab, what do you do with it? Which is a great question. What you do seems a little counterintuitive. You are supposed to take a bunch of pictures of it, not just all from the top, but a bunch of different angles as close as you dare to get to it. You're able to handle it and maybe put it in a Tupperware to get really good pictures, and then you let it go. And that's because, I'll get into this a little bit towards the ID portion of the presentation. They're still incredibly rare, and there's been a lot of chances of mistaken identity. And so not all European green crabs are green, and a lot of our native species are green, and so some people see like a funky hairy helmet crab, and like, I've never seen that crab before, and they stomp on it, and it's one of our native crabs. And so WDFW has just recommended you take really good pictures and submit it to them on their Green Crab Hub. There's a bunch of different resources, and I have stickers in the back that have a QR code so you can scan, it takes you right to the reporting page. But yes, let it go and just make a really good note of exactly where you are. If it's already a location, say you're on the Pacific coast, say in Aberdeen or Ocean Shores, we know that there's crabs out there, but if you still want to report it, go for it. If it's in the Salish Sea, maybe say up north near Drayton or somewhere where there's also a pretty good sized population of green crabs, I would still report it, but it might not lead to that rapid response, because if there's already trapping going on, there won't be like that huge effort to outfish it because they're already working on populations up north. But if you see something around here, definitely take a bunch of pictures and report it to WDFW, absolutely. Yes?
Has the East Coast been successful in controlling the invasion?
They have not. I think their crabs kind of arrived in the 1800s before a lot of like ecological work was being done, and so they just kind of run amok there. But there are efforts now to reduce populations by either working with fishermen to create a fishery. Since these crabs are really small, it's a soft shell crab fishery. So catching these crabs when they molt and turning them into a roux or stews, and partnering with some restaurants in the area. There was a really great New York Times article a couple weeks ago, especially about green crabs. So if you want to look for that one. I know some organizations, or like there's a company that made green crab whiskey out of green crab shells. I haven't tried it. I think it's salty, so I don't really think that would be very good. But I know that they have dog and cat treats that they used to sell at Mud Bay Pets, and I bought them as soon as I saw them for my cats, and they would not eat them. So that makes me the best.
So my next question would be, how big do they get and can they be eaten?
Yeah, they get about 4 inches wide across the back of their carapace when they're fully grown, which I think of as kind of the size of the back of your fist. But they don't have like big meaty claws that some of the like Dungeness crabs will have. And so, yeah, no, and that's also illegal to possess them or eat them in Washington State. Back east, a little bit of a different story. But I have, I think if they're still, you can eat them, they're just a little bit harder to crack open. So the soft shell crab fishery is, I think, still under development. That's with New Hampshire Sea Grant. Yeah.
So do they crossbreed with other crabs?
Not that I know of. I think they just stay with other green crabs, not so many hybrids. All right, any other questions before I jump into Molt search? Great. Alrighty, so for Molt search, this is a semi-systematic survey, and some of you might be familiar with this because Harbor Wild Watch does a lot of Molt search surveys out here in the South Sound region. So I'm not going to do a full Molt search training today because that'll take about an hour, and usually I like to get outside and go look at crabs and really spend a lot of time on ID. So I'm just going to encourage you all, if you're interested, to look to Harbor Wild Watch. Yep.
You will be doing training.
Yes, Christina, because we don't really do trainings in the winter when crabs aren't as active and they're not growing as much, so Molt search really picks up in the spring and summer, and that's when we do a lot of trainings. It is a semi-systematic survey that we'll spend about 20 minutes walking along the beach, picking up every crustacean molt that you find, including shrimps and other crabs. And then you're going to, at the end of your 20 minutes, you're going to identify everything, look for European green crabs, optionally identify other crabs, and then also there's the option to take data on Dungeness crabs that you find, and then crush all the molts. We'll take a picture first, and then crush all the molts and upload it to an app. And so it's a really simple 4-step program. It's designed to be really simple that once you go through the training, you're able to just walk through the steps on the app that tell you how to submit everything. It can be done anytime. It doesn't have to be done like crab team training where it's only once a month for 6 months out of the year. It can be on any Salish Sea shoreline that you have safe and legal access to. And it's a really simple app-based submission process that walks you through everything. And the 2 main goals for this program are to get more people out on the beach looking for European green crabs, for the early detection and rapid response for these crabs in new locations that we might already know that they are already there, and also to optionally get information on Dungeness crabs when they're in their juvenile form. A lot of researchers know what they are like at the really large harvestable crab level, but not a lot when they're kind of in this intermediate juvenile stage. Okay, so we'll walk through some of the quick steps, just to give you an overview of what the survey is like. So you choose a location where you have safe and legal access to the water. And you're going to gather your materials. The first thing you need is a phone or a device that can take pictures, and also access to the MyCo staff, which is who we've partnered with to be able to submit reports to. A collection container, like a Tupperware, something like that, to be able to hold all your crabs so you're not balancing them. Somehow every time I do this, I forget that, and I'm just balancing crab shells in my arms, and it's not a very reasonable thing to do. A measuring device like calipers, which you receive when you go through training, or another item for scales. That way when we look at the picture, we know how big the crabs are. And then a Molt Search ID guide or digital access, that's on our website, and you also are given that at a Molt Search training. So then once you arrive at the beach with all of your goodies that you've prepared, all your materials, you conduct your survey. And so we recommend you look out at the beach at the rack line where the high tide has washed a lot of debris up, and that's a lot of the time where we look for crabs because they're so light and porous, so they just kind of wash up and are deposited there. And so we recommend that you take a look at the beach before you get started, and that's where you spend most of your time looking. And then you conduct your survey. And so we use a unit to standardize these, and it's called person minutes, which is kind of a silly unit, but it helps us standardize the number of people that have their eyes down looking on the beach. So if you're one person, you're going to set a timer on your phone with an alarm so you don't lose track of time, and walk for 20 minutes looking for crustacean molts and putting them in your container. If you're 2 people, you're going to be looking for 10 minutes, because that's 2 people looking for 10 minutes adds up to 20. And then for 4 people, it's 5 minutes. And any more than 4 people in your group, we recommend you kind of break up into smaller groups, because it's a little bit easier once you get into a flow of things. And if you have a group of 20 people and you're just looking for 1 minute, you might as well just break up into smaller groups at that point. And I'm going to also recommend an alarm, because I've been like, oh, I'll check my phone. And then I'm like, wait, when did I start? How long have I been walking? Like, what? So it's really good to just have an alarm so you're just focused in the zone, and then you're reminded when to end the Molt Search. So as you're walking along for the number of person minutes that matches for the number of people you have in your group, we follow the half carapace rule. And so you're looking for the carapace, which is the large back part of a crab that is the most identifiable for species. Half carapace is something we're looking for 50% or greater, and this allows us to identify the crabs really easy and also avoid double counting. If we have kind of like a fragmented shell, we don't know if that all came from one crab or if it came from a bunch of crabs. It's really important for ID. If we just have a little fragment, it's really hard to ID that little fragment of crab. Going along with that, we don't count partial body molts, which is like claws, legs, abdomen, for the same reason. They're difficult to ID just for a singular leg. And we also don't know if multiple legs came from one crab or they all came from different crabs. So once your alarm goes off at the end of your person minutes, you lay out all of your crabs and start IDing. It might be really fun and tempting that as you're walking along, you start IDing crabs like, oh, I've never seen this one before, and stop and start looking. We recommend you just use the whole 20 minutes to be looking down, and then take the time to ID at the end. And so what I do is I kind of sort all the molts out and put them all face up and kind of put them in their batches by the species. And we also recommend this just because it helps you slow down and make sure you didn't miss a European green crab as you were frantically collecting molts. And so by laying them all out and taking a picture overhead with calipers or another item for scale, it allows you to double check for European green crab and have a really clear photo to upload for the app and for the report. So the gorgeous overhead photo with an item for scale, it doesn't have to be calipers. I've seen sunglasses, car keys, an upside down credit card, things like that. And then once you submit your report, it gets reviewed. And so we really appreciate really clear photos that are pretty zoomed in on your collection of molts that you have, because staff like myself go through and double check all of the IDs before we upload them. Just to make sure any European green crabs didn't sneak into the mix. So as you're kind of going through the app, it asks about the time, the location, the number of people you have with you, a bunch of information. And then also it has, did you find molts, yes or no, and did you find European green crab? And so then it walks you through things like how many did you find and the measurements. And we recommend taking pictures of every European green crab if you come across them, because we will follow up with questions, making sure the ID is good, asking for more photos, and also double checking the location to make sure it's accurate in the report. Additionally, to the European green crab measurements, if you don't have any, just click 0 and then skip to the next section. There's the option to submit Dungeness crab data, and because it turns out very little is known about the juvenile crabs, despite their superstar status as adults. And so we're particularly looking at like the 40 millimeter to 130 or 150 millimeter range. And so there's the option to submit count of Dungeness crabs as well as carapace width, which is the widest part of the carapace, and also carapace height data. And this kind of helps. We're partnering with the the Pacific Northwest Crab Research Group, PCRG. That's the only acronym I know by PCRG. So we partnered with this research group in order to get more information about these Dungeness juveniles and where they spend their time, and also seeing what their impacts are if European green crab are in the area, because people are very interested in the impact of European green crab on the Dungeness crab fishery. There's some preliminary work being done by someone at my master's program, which is really exciting for her thesis. So I'm really excited to see what work comes out of that. And you might be wondering, okay, why molt search? I thought we just cared about European green crab and the other crabs are cool, but that's okay. But it's because there are a couple different survey methods to get Dungeness crab information and size. So the first is intertidal survey. These are histograms. Let me back up. These are histograms. And on the x-axis, it is the size of the crab in millimeters. On the y-axis, it's the count. So on the first one in this coral color, intertidal surveys are just kind of all along the rocks, and we're finding your really, really small Dungeness crabs, typically around the 20 millimeter mark, which is really, really small. Then looking at beach stains, it's a little bit bigger, a little bit more of a range. That's the green area. And then for the blue range, this is for adult deep water surveys, so through trapping that's off of boats and such. That gets the really large crabs. But then on the bottom in purple is the crabs that are found during molt hunts, which we have a range of really, really small crabs up to 150 millimeters. And so molt hunts really are able to get crabs from all of these different habitats. And since they're all the molts are washing up on the beach, we're able to see all of these different areas that the crabs are using for habitat at different life stages, and get information on what crabs are in the area. And I want to credit the Swinomish Indian tribal community for this slide, and then also the Skagit River Cooperative for the beach stain data. This was really, really great, and it's a really nice way to just see how wide of a range of crab molts that we can get just from doing molt hunts. All right, back to the molt search. So we've submitted our picture, we have our location, our time, we entered optional information about European green crabs, we enter, not optional, mandatory information about European green crabs and optional information about Dungeness crabs, and then you're going to submit it on MindCoast. It was just a super simple program. It has all of the information already plugged in as far as time and location. And then it gets uploaded for us to review. So after the survey, you stomp on the molts, So that avoids double counting. So if another molt searcher comes along behind you, they don't just say, oh wow, perfect, molt search done. And we don't double count those crabs. And then again, if you find a European green crab molt through your molt search, we'll follow up with you to get pictures, better idea of the location, and additional details as needed. And don't forget to check the local rules around collections and taking home cool shells and things like that. The really interesting part about molt search is that it informs management. So we can see where these reports are being done. And once they're approved by me or some crab team working on the molt search program, managers can go in and see where people are doing green crab work and looking for these crabs on their local shoreline, and then target some other resources for trapping other places where people are already on the lookout for these crabs, which is a really cool connection to the management aspect. So molt search gets a lot more people's eyes out on the beach and a lot of shorelines that we just don't have the resources, time, equipment, personnel to get out for every single shoreline. All right, that was a really quick overview of molt search, and again, I'll plug molt search training later this spring. Does anyone have any questions about the protocol or how to get involved or anything else? Yes?
Do you have any idea how long the molt remains, or can it drift a long ways before the molt actually takes place?
Yeah, definitely. It depends on the conditions. So stormier conditions can help kind of break down molt a little bit quicker, but they will stay in pretty good shape and just regular kind of washing up on the tide conditions. And they can drift. I think that also is conditional, depends on the water body, if it's more open ocean or if it's kind of in a smaller cove or inlet that doesn't really have as much wave action. But it's a pretty good proxy for what crabs are in the area, even if it's not directly right on the beach. We know that's a good indication that they haven't gone too far.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a great program there.
Yeah.
So if you're watching kind of like the tide charts, at what point in the tide would be like an ideal time to go out to do a search?
I think, well, and we say anytime, I would say after the high tide, once kind of high tide has kind of dropped everything along the rack line, because then it's just really easy to target just one location on the beach. Yeah, and anytime, technically. Yeah.
So why the 20 minutes?
20 minutes. I'm not exactly sure why that number in particular. I think maybe just crowdsourced. It was a good amount of time that was large enough that it could be divisible up to 4 people. And also maybe 30 minutes felt too long. I'm actually not quite sure, because I think 20 minutes is that's a pretty good number. Divisible, you could do a couple in an hour, do 3 in an hour. If you're like
So
really working hard.
you're not limited to 20 minutes.
No, you can do a bunch in a row. So if you start on one end of the beach and walk for 20 minutes, then you can do another one and another one. Yes, so you can do several reports. And also want to stress that finding no molts is still information. And so there's an option to say no molts and then to continue. So if you find no molts, you should submit a molt search report. And we can continue and keep looking. All right, any other questions before we jump into crab ID? Yes.
I just wanted to clarify it. But you only do 20 minutes for one section.
Yeah, 20 minutes for one section. So if you had a partner starting in one location, you're walking, ideally you wouldn't double back and do that section again. You would keep walking down the beach and do another area.
I do have another unrelated question. Is the molt valuable to any other sea creatures, or is it you know?
I don't think so. I think it kind of just like crushes into sand. But yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think that's why we're okay with kind of crushing it down and just kind of helping that process along a little bit quicker. Yeah, I'm thinking like, I don't know, like hermit crabs just aren't true crabs, things like that. Alrighty, crab ID. Are we feeling ready? This is a really short section, so I'm only going to talk about European green crab ID. I have molt drawers in the back with native crabs if anyone's interested in talking more crab ID at the end. Okay. First, we're going to do a little crab anatomy session, just so you get oriented to the parts of a crab. So the first is the carapace. This is the part that I've been talking about. It is the largest part. It's the crab's back. And it's the most unique and able to help inform crab ID. These crabs with these carapaces have marginal teeth. And so these are kind of protruding spines on each side of the carapace. And crab species have unique numbers and shapes, which are really informative to help you clue into what ID or what crab ID you're kind of trying to suss out when you're looking at your crab molts. Between the marginal teeth and between the eyes, we have the rostrum, which is the nose of the crab, and these crabs have a number of bumps, which are different than the bumps of the marginal teeth, and just looking at the eyes helps you differentiate which are the rostrum of the nose and which are kind of on the side of the carapace. Additionally, we have walking legs. True crabs have 4. And then we have the claws. Those are the pinchy parts. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. But sometimes for crab IDs, when you're looking for molts, you just have that back carapace. A lot of the other body parts, the abdomen, all of that can be broken off and washed away. And so we really zoom in on this carapace piece because it's most informative for crab ID. So we're going to talk about what to not look for with a green crab. And we're not going to look for a crab that is green. Because European green crabs aren't always green. It's a kind of confusing name. Crabs can be red, they can be brown, and molts lose their color over time. So they can even be white or tan. So yeah, no green crabs when we're looking for European green crabs. Additionally, we're not going to look for green crabs because a lot of our native crabs can be green. So all the crabs up on the screen are native. And some of them, like the hairy helmet crab I talked about earlier, kind of funky, maybe something that a lot of people don't see very often, kind of an interesting shaped carapace, look a little funky, they have textures and hairs, and people are like, that's not a good crab. It's a native crab, don't crush it, don't take it away, take pictures, take lots of pictures. So what should we look for when we're looking at European green crabs? The first is the carapace. It's about 4 inches wide across the back when fully grown. The eyes, they have 2 of them. And then on each side of the eyes are 5 marginal teeth or spines. And the way that I remember this is that European green crabs have 5 teeth, and the word green has 5 letters, G-R-E-E-N. They're the only crab in Washington State that has 5 marginal teeth on each side of their head. And so if you're counting the marginal teeth and you count 5, it's likely you have a green crab, or maybe you miscounted. Maybe you count again. But anything that's more than that is likely a cancer crab, like a Dungeness, or a graceful crab. Anything that's less than that, like 3, is one of our native short crabs. It has 3 rostral bumps, which sometimes can be hard to tell the difference between the marginal teeth and the rostrum. And another thing is looking at the shape of the carapace. So this crab kind of has a diamond or kind of gem-shaped carapace, and other crabs could have square, ovular, and kind of diamond or kite-shaped. So, but the best way, again, is those 5 marginal teeth. And so looking at both the crab that has all of its legs and pinchy parts, and then also just the back, it's just easiest to look at 5 marginal teeth on each side, and remember that green has 5, and the crab has 5 teeth. All right, any questions on ID? And I have more crab in the back. Yes?
I'm wondering if there's any talk of just like rebranding European green crab to take the green out of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people talked about calling, oh gosh, what was it? It was like 5-spine crab or something like that. It's more like, yeah, something a lot more specific and not color specific because like people are colorblind. And so, yes, there's been talk. I don't know if there's like a large scientific movement to rename the crab. I think there'd be like a lot of rebranding for like brochures and pamphlets, and ID guides would have to be done along with that. And before I go, I will just leave you with a reminder about our monitoring network. We do trainings in March that have already gotten underway this week of our monthly trapping, so it's already too late to get involved this year, but not too late for next year if you're interested in working with us. Go ahead and email that. And then for Molt search, anytime, anywhere, there's training info online, and there's a QR code to the Molt search website where we list upcoming trainings. Yeah.
So when do they release their eggs? Is there a certain time of year?
I think year-round, especially here with our really mild winters. Crabs are most active in summer, but they also reproduce and release eggs in the summer, and we see really large pulses of young of the year crabs, which are the really small crabs.
So do the eggs have to be fertilized?
Yes, they have to be fertilized by a male crab, and they'll be like a clasping pair is what they're called. And then the gravid female will release her eggs after that.
And are they released in a nest, or are they just? Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the time between like egg to full grown individual?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm not a crab biologist. I
Okay.
don't have even a biology undergrad. But I can always get back to you on
Yeah,
that
great.
because we have a crab biologist on staff, and he's the crab king. He does dissections and all of the crab ID. And so I can definitely get back
Yeah,
to you on that.
I would love that.
Yes.
Would there be an active process or program to get rid of them if you ever find them?
From the management level? Or
Is there any way to get rid of them?
right now, management from WSG is intensive trapping in order to manage populations and kind of keep populations down low enough that maybe a cold winter or kind of bad conditions will come along to kind of take care of it. But no, there's not like a parasite or anything that can be released in the water. That's in my knowledge. Any other questions? Yes.
Because you're looking at the carib in the back, you're not keeping track of male or females then, so there's no identification of molts.
For the Molt search program, if there is an abdomen present, there's going to be a spot if you find a European green crab to do the number, a measurement of the carapace, and also if the abdomen is present, a male or female. And then also if it's not present, you can also say unknown. Yeah. And then also pictures, of course. Yeah. And then for crab team trapping, we do sex every crab and measure the first 10 crab, or the first 10 like native crabs, male and female, and then also every single European green crab is measured and sexed. And that information goes along with the molt training on how to do that. All right, that was all I have for you all today. Thank you so much for having me.